The sound of shattering glass still rings in my ears, even now. That night, my son Michael, who had just turned 35, slammed his fist so hard on my kitchen table that the glasses rattled and one fell to the floor, breaking into sharp little pieces. He looked me right in the eye with anger I had never seen before and said, "If you don't give me what I deserve, I'll make sure everyone sees you for what you really are." That was the betrayal. It wasn't just words. It was a son talking to his mother like I was some enemy who owed him something, as though my entire life's work and savings were just waiting for him to claim. Michael had always been ambitious, but somewhere along the way, ambition had turned into greed. He had recently lost his job, and instead of rebuilding or taking responsibility, he began circling me like a hawk, eyeing the trust fund and the house I had worked decades to pay off. He saw dollar signs, not family. And that night, his motive became as clear as day: he wanted money fast, and he didn't care how he got it. I remember sitting across from him, my cardigan wrapped tight around my shoulders, staring at the boy I had raised. His hair was messy, his face red with anger, his hands trembling not from fear but from entitlement. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice but not his cruelty, "I'm not asking. I'm telling you. You're going to help me. If you don't, I'll make sure you regret it." The kitchen was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall and the hum of the refrigerator. My heart pounded. I had seen Michael frustrated before, sure. I had seen him disappointed when life didn't go his way. But this was something darker, something calculated. And then he leaned in closer, his words slicing through the air, "Don't be surprised when you end up paying for my pain. One way or another you will." That was the shocking twist, though I didn't yet understand how deep it would go. I thought he was bluffing, throwing out threats to scare me into handing over money. I thought it would pass, that he would cool down and maybe even apologize. But I was wrong. That moment was the seed of something bigger, a plan he had already started putting together behind my back. At 73, I was no fool. I had lived long enough to know when someone's eyes carried lies, and Michael's eyes that night were filled with them. But no part of me imagined he would stoop as low as he did, dragging strangers, first responders, and even the law into his twisted scheme. The days after that night were tense. Michael avoided me for a while, only sending the occasional text asking if I'd changed my mind. He was cold, like I was nothing but an obstacle between him and what he wanted. I tried to distract myself with gardening, my weekly book club, even baking pies for the church sale. But no matter what I did, a knot sat in my stomach. Then one chilly Thursday morning, my phone rang. The caller ID made my chest tighten. It was Michael. "Mom," he said, his voice shaky. "I've been in an accident." My heart dropped. I nearly dropped the mug of coffee in my hand. "What? Where are you? Are you okay?" He groaned dramatically into the phone. "I'm in the hospital. It was bad, Mom. Real bad. I might not walk the same again. I need you here." Without thinking, I grabbed my purse and keys and rushed out the door. A mother's instinct never fades, no matter how old your children get. My son was hurt, and in that moment, every ounce of anger I'd felt toward him vanished. All I wanted was to make sure he was safe. But when I got to the hospital, things didn't feel right. Michael was lying in a bed, a neck brace around his throat, his arm in a sling, and his face twisted in an expression of both pain and expectation. He looked almost theatrical, like an actor playing a part. His girlfriend, a tall brunette in her late 20s with sharp cheekbones and a calculating smile, sat beside him. She barely looked at me, only whispering something into his ear when I walked in. "Mom," Michael moaned, stretching out his hand like a martyr in a play. "It's worse than I thought. The doctor said it could take years before I'm back on my feet. I don't know how I'll pay the bills, how I'll survive without help." Tears pricked my eyes. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to throw my arms around him and tell him I'd take care of everything. But something in my gut told me this wasn't the full story. Then I noticed the paramedic standing near the doorway, talking quietly with a nurse. He looked like he was in his 40s, broad-shouldered, with a no-nonsense expression. His uniform was neatly pressed, his hair cropped short. When his eyes flicked over to me, they softened just slightly, almost as though he wanted to say something but couldn't. Michael kept talking, spinning his tale of broken bones and ruined futures, emphasizing how expensive everything was going to be. He kept slipping in phrases like, "Mom, if only you could help with some money, and you wouldn't want your only son to struggle, would you?" It hit me like a thunderclap. This wasn't just an accident. This was his plan. He wanted to sue, and not just anyone. He wanted to sue me. The betrayal from that realization was so heavy it made me grip the side of the bed for support. Michael was weaving a story where I was somehow to blame, where I would become the villain forced to pay for damages that never even happened. And the worst part? I wasn't sure who would believe me if I said otherwise. I caught the paramedic watching Michael closely, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed as though he'd seen this performance before. When Michael complained loudly about his back, the paramedic leaned toward the nurse and said something that made her eyebrows shoot up. That was the moment I realized, someone else knew. Someone had seen the truth. But I couldn't yet imagine just how shocking his words would be, words that would shatter Michael's scheme in an instant. Stay with me, because what happened next was the kind of twist you'd never believe unless you lived it yourself. The hospital room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. I stood there, clutching my purse against my chest, trying to steady my breathing. My son Michael lay in bed, pretending to shift uncomfortably, groaning dramatically every few seconds as though his body was on the verge of breaking apart. His girlfriend sat beside him, dabbing his forehead with a tissue as if he were some fallen soldier. The paramedic leaned against the wall near the doorway, arms crossed. His eyes weren't on Michael's sling or neck brace, they were locked on his face, studying every twitch, every poorly acted wince. I could tell, this man had seen hundreds of real accidents. He knew what genuine pain looked like. And what he was seeing now wasn't it. "Mom," Michael said again, stretching his voice like taffy. "I don't know how I'll ever recover. The bills are piling up already. Insurance won't cover everything. And," he paused, making sure I was watching, "I don't know how long I'll be able to work. If ever." His girlfriend chimed in, her voice smooth like syrup but sharp beneath. "He's been through so much, ma'am. You know, stress like this can ruin a man. He needs stability. He needs support. Support. Money." That's what they meant. They weren't even trying to hide it. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Michael," I said softly, "what exactly happened? You told me it was an accident. How?" He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes for a moment. "Well, I slipped in your driveway, Mom. You know that crack near the garage? I told you a dozen times it was dangerous. I landed hard. Really hard. The doctors said it's serious." The air around me felt heavy, pressing down on my shoulders. My driveway. He was blaming me. He wasn't just hurt, he was setting up a story where I was responsible. The paramedic stepped forward slightly, clearing his throat. His voice was calm but firm. "Ma'am, if I may," he glanced at Michael, then back at me. When we arrived at the scene, there were some inconsistencies. Michael's eyes shot wide, and his girlfriend's hand froze on his shoulder. "Don't listen to him," Michael blurted quickly, his voice suddenly louder than his supposed injuries should allow. "He's exaggerating. He doesn't know what he's talking about." But the paramedic ignored him. He spoke directly to me. "We found Mr. Michael sitting on the grass, not lying down. He was holding his phone, recording himself. No signs of immediate trauma. No dirt or debris on his clothing, no swelling consistent with a fresh fall. And when I asked if he could move his legs, he did. Easily." A sharp silence filled the room. My stomach churned. Michael turned red, his voice desperate now. "Mom, don't listen to this guy. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know what I've been through." He clutched his side, groaning again, though his timing was sloppy. The paramedic's eyes narrowed. "I know what I saw. And what I saw didn't match the story." I stood frozen. My son, my own flesh and blood, was faking an accident. To sue me. To drain me. To twist my life into his payday. The betrayal burned through me hotter than fire. This wasn't just greed anymore. It was cruelty. A lie wrapped in tears and fake neck braces. The nurse in the room shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. Even she seemed unsure what to believe. Michael's girlfriend leaned forward, her tone dripping with venom. "Are you calling him a liar? He's in pain. You wouldn't understand because you don't care." But the paramedic didn't flinch. "Ma'am," he said firmly, his voice directed at me, "you have the right to know the truth. I've been in this field 20 years. Injuries don't fake themselves. People do. Michael slammed his fist against the hospital rail, his face twisting with rage. Mom, are you really going to take his word over mine? Your son? The one who's been there for you. But his words bounced off me. My mind was a whirlwind. Every late-night phone call asking for money, every time he'd avoided responsibility, every sharp word when I didn't cave to his demands, it all made sense now. This wasn't new. It was just the worst version yet. I looked at him, really looked at him. His sling was too neat, his groans too rehearsed, his eyes darting too quickly whenever the paramedic spoke. He wasn't in pain. He was in panic. For the first time in years, I saw Michael not as my son, but as a stranger, a manipulative, greedy stranger who was willing to tear down his own mother for a check. The paramedic finally stepped back, giving me a small nod as if to say, "It's your choice what to do with this truth." Then he left the room quietly, his boots clicking against the linoleum floor. Michael's girlfriend hissed under her breath, "We can still make this work. Don't back down." And just like that, I realized this wasn't only Michael's plan. She was in on it too. Feeding him, encouraging him, maybe even masterminding it. My chest tightened, but underneath the ache was a spark of steel. I had been betrayed. I had been threatened. But I wasn't broken. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edge of Michael's bed, and whispered just loud enough for both of them to hear, "If you thought I would roll over and hand you my life's work, you picked the wrong mother." The look on Michael's face, a mixture of shock, anger, and fear, was almost satisfying. Almost. But I knew this was just the beginning. He wouldn't give up that easily. And neither would I. Because what he didn't know yet was that I had kept records. Records of every request, every manipulation, every cruel word. And I wasn't about to let him drag me into court without the full truth being revealed. The game had changed. And for the first time, I was ready to fight back. The first week after I refused to pay for Michael's wedding was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Michael didn't call. Neither did Vanessa. Even my younger daughter Claire, who normally texted me daily updates about her life, seemed to go silent as if she were instructed not to involve herself. My phone, which used to buzz constantly, sat untouched on the coffee table, the silence in my house growing heavier with each passing day. I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself I had spent a lifetime answering their calls, fixing their problems, and funding their ambitions. Maybe I deserved this quiet. Maybe I had earned it. But beneath that bravado, a hollowness was building, a gnawing pit that whispered ugly questions I didn't want to answer. Had Michael already replaced me? Had my own son written me off completely, not even worth the courtesy of a call? On the 8th day, I decided I couldn't sit around any longer. I drove to his apartment, well, the luxury apartment I had co-signed for and helped him furnish. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I parked, and when I walked up the steps to his building, I felt more like a stranger than a mother. I knocked. For several long seconds, there was no answer. Then I heard muffled voices from inside. A woman's laugh, Vanessa's unmistakable high-pitched giggle, floated through the door, followed by the sound of glass clinking against glass. Finally, the door opened. Vanessa stood there barefoot, her silk robe slipping carelessly off one shoulder. She looked me up and down with a smirk, not even trying to mask her disdain. "Oh, it's you," she said flatly. "Where's Michael?" I asked, forcing a polite smile. She leaned casually against the doorframe, not moving to let me in. "Busy." I peered past her, and my stomach twisted. Michael was inside, lounging on the couch with a drink in hand, laughing with two of Vanessa's friends. He didn't even glance toward the door. I raised my voice. "Michael, I need to talk to you." His laugh cut off abruptly. Slowly, he turned his head, eyes locking on mine. For a second I saw my son, the little boy who used to run to the door when I came home from work, eager to show me his drawings. But the warmth I once knew had been replaced with something cold, distant, and almost resentful. "Mom, now's not a good time," he said. "We're busy." Busy. My throat tightened. "I've been calling all week. I thought something happened." Vanessa interrupted with a sharp laugh. "Nothing happened, except your little tantrum about money. Don't act surprised that you're not exactly welcome right now." Her words sliced into me, but I held my ground. "This is between Michael and me. Not you." Her smirk widened. Everything is between me and Michael now. Michael stood up, walking toward the door. For a flicker of a moment, I thought he might defend me, might tell Vanessa to stop, might invite me in so we could speak privately. But instead, he positioned himself beside her, his arm casually slipping around her waist. "Mom, I told you before," he said firmly. "If you're not going to support us, then, there's nothing to talk about." Support us? Those words stung worse than I expected. My mind reeled. Was I not the one who had supported him his entire life? From his education to his first car, from his rent to his endless ventures that fizzled out after a few months, hadn't I always been there, quietly picking up the pieces? "Michael," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm your mother." For a moment, his expression softened. For a moment, I thought I saw doubt in his eyes. But then Vanessa leaned her head against his shoulder, whispering something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it hardened him again. "I think you should leave," he said coldly. The door shut in my face. I stood frozen on the welcome mat, numb. My hands trembled as I clutched my bag, and my vision blurred with tears. It felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. This couldn't be my life. My own son couldn't be shutting me out like this. But he had. The next weeks blurred together, a fog of hurt and humiliation. I tried to keep busy, gardening, volunteering at the library, cooking meals I never finished, but nothing filled the silence. Every time the phone rang, I lunged for it, praying it was Michael. But it never was. Then came the wedding invitations. Not one, not two, but multiple, scattered across social media, shared by Vanessa's friends, her relatives, even her hairdresser. They were glossy, professional photographs of Vanessa in a dazzling white dress, her manicured hand resting possessively on Michael's chest. Each caption was worse than the last. The wedding of the year. The couple who had it all. A love story written in the stars. My chest ached with every photo, every tag, every mocking comment that flooded my feed. The worst part? Not a single envelope arrived in my mailbox. No invitation. Not even a courtesy card. I was officially erased. Claire tried to comfort me. She came over with takeout, sat on my couch, and wrapped her arm around me as I cried. "Mom, maybe it's for the best," she said gently. "Michael he's changed. You don't need to put yourself through more pain by going." But I shook my head fiercely. "He's my son. I'll be there, whether they want me or not." Claire bit her lip, hesitant. "If you show up uninvited, it could get ugly. Vanessa." "I don't care about Vanessa," I snapped, surprising even myself with the sharpness of my tone. "She can't erase me from my son's life. She won't." Claire didn't argue further, but the worry in her eyes said enough. The day of the wedding crept closer. 3 days before the ceremony, I received a package on my doorstep. There was no note, no return address, just a sleek black box tied with a silver ribbon. My heart raced as I opened it, hoping it was an olive branch from Michael. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single object. A bill. A thick, printed invoice from the wedding planner, totaling $290,000. At the bottom, in Vanessa's delicate handwriting, were 3 words. "You still owe." My knees buckled. I sank onto the steps, clutching the paper as if it were a weapon. My chest burned with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. After everything, after shutting me out, after humiliating me, after erasing me, they still had the audacity to demand money. I looked at that number again. $290,000. Not just money. My retirement. My savings. My security. The choice was clear. I would not pay a single dime. But as I sat there, the invoice shaking in my hands, another thought wormed its way into my mind. If they wanted a war, maybe it was time I finally gave them one. The cliffhanger hung heavy in the air. I was no longer just a mother begging for scraps of affection. I was a woman pushed to her limit. And when pushed that far, even the quietest person finds a way to strike back. The morning sunlight slanted through my living room blinds, spilling over the coffee table where the $290,000 invoice still lay. I traced the edges of the paper with my finger, my heart thudding in a rhythm that was equal parts fear and resolve. Today wasn't just another day. Today was the day I would stop being the victim in my own life. I gathered the documents I had been collecting over the past few weeks, copies of Michael's failed ventures that I had financed, emails where he pleaded for money, texts where Vanessa tried to manipulate me into co-signing loans, and receipts proving how much I had already contributed to their wedding preparations. Every carefully preserved piece of evidence was a weapon now. I dressed with purpose. My gray hair, always meticulously combed back, was pulled into a neat bun. I wore a tailored navy cardigan over a crisp white blouse, black trousers, and low-heeled shoes that made a quiet click with each step as I moved. My face was calm but determined, every line etched with decades of wisdom and experience. I was about to step into a battlefield I never thought I'd have to navigate at my age. I arrived at the wedding venue 2 hours before the ceremony. The sprawling estate was abuzz with activity, florists adjusting arrangements, waitstaff rehearsing their lines, photographers snapping test shots of the bride and groom. But my focus was singular. I moved past the crowd, careful not to draw attention, until I found the wedding planner's office tucked in a side wing of the mansion. "Ms. Richards," I said, introducing myself firmly to the woman behind the desk. She was a tall blonde professional in her early 30s, dressed in a black blazer and pencil skirt, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her expression was polite but guarded. "I need to speak about the billing for the wedding," I continued, placing the invoice and a folder of documents in front of her. "I believe there are discrepancies you need to be aware of." Her eyes flicked over the invoice, then over my papers. "Ms. Thompson, these are wedding expenses." The bride and groom agreed to them. "Yes," I said, suppressing the tremor in my hands. But the agreement was made under false pretenses. The groom, my son, claimed injuries to manipulate me into paying. The bride, Vanessa, coerced him. I have documentation proving their actions and financial misrepresentation. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, curiosity replacing her initial caution. I laid out the emails, receipts, and messages with precise detail. Each document was a nail in the coffin of their story. By the time I finished, the wedding planner's eyes were wide. This is serious. If true, it could void some of the contracts, maybe even involve legal action. A spark of satisfaction warmed me. It was the first real acknowledgement of truth I'd received in weeks. I left the office, feeling the weight of inevitability settling over me. The confrontation wasn't over yet. Michael and Vanessa would see their perfect world start to crumble. As I made my way toward the main hall, I saw them. Vanessa, radiant in her flowing white gown, adjusting her veil, her face alight with excitement. Michael by her side, looking smug, confident, untouchable. My chest tightened. The sight of them together, so oblivious to the storm about to descend, was almost cinematic in its cruelty. Almost. I didn't approach immediately. Instead, I found a quiet corner near the guest seating, where I could observe, analyze, and wait for the precise moment to act. Every minute of hesitation had been calculated, every movement planned. Today, they would learn that manipulation has consequences. The ceremony began. Guests were settling into their seats, the soft strains of a string quartet floating through the air. I watched Vanessa glance around, her smile bright but forced. Michael held her hand tightly, clearly trying to maintain composure. And yet, beneath that confidence, I could see cracks forming. It started subtly. The wedding planner appeared at the edge of the ceremony, motioning to one of the staff. She whispered something, and the staff member nodded, moving quickly toward the front of the room. Moments later, a server approached the officiant with a stack of papers. Confusion rippled through the congregation as the officiant cleared his throat, eyes scanning the documents. "What is this?" Vanessa whispered sharply to Michael, her face paling. "Nothing," Michael muttered, trying to take control, but the papers were already in play. The officiant, a dignified man in his 50s with silver hair and round spectacles, held up the top sheet. "These are legal documents," he announced. "Apparently, there have been claims filed regarding the financial agreements tied to this wedding. I must ask the bride and groom to address these claims before we proceed." Gasps and murmurs ran through the crowd. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed again, disbelief etched on her face. Michael's confident posture crumbled, and for the first time, I saw fear. Real fear. I stepped forward, my cardigan brushing lightly against my skirt as I moved with deliberate calm. Every eye in the room turned toward me. The crowd's chatter fell silent, leaving only the faint rustle of fabric and the distant notes of the string quartet. "I am the mother of the groom," I said, projecting my voice so every guest could hear. I have reason to believe that certain claims made regarding this wedding were based on deception. My son faked an injury, encouraged by the bride, to manipulate me into paying nearly $300,000 for this event. Shock hit the room like a thunderclap. Vanessa's hands flew to her mouth. Michael's face turned an unnatural shade of red. The officiant glanced at the documents in his hands, then back at me, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "You have documentation?" the officiant asked carefully. I nodded, gesturing to the folder in my hands. "Every message, every email, every financial record is here. This isn't just hearsay. This is the truth." The crowd murmured, guests shifting in their seats, some whispering to one another, others pulling out phones to document the moment. Vanessa's friends turned toward her, their expressions a mixture of shock and dismay. Michael tried to grab my arm, to pull me aside, but I pulled free. "This stops now," I said, voice rising slightly. "No more lies. No more manipulation. No more pretending that money can replace honesty and family." Vanessa stepped forward, attempting to regain composure. "You have no right." "I have every right," I interrupted, holding up the folder. "Because I am the mother of the groom, and I will not allow my son's life to be controlled by greed and deceit." Michael stammered, opening his mouth, but no words came out. His carefully constructed facade was shattered. The room had turned against him without a single forceful gesture on my part. The wedding planner stepped forward, glancing at me and then at the couple. "Given these claims and the evidence presented, I cannot in good conscience proceed with the ceremony. Legal counsel will need to review these documents immediately." Vanessa's face twisted with fury, and Michael's knees seemed to buckle beneath him. I felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered with a twinge of sadness. I hadn't set out to humiliate him, though watching him squirm was undeniably sweet. I had set out to reclaim control, to assert that manipulation has limits, that deceit has consequences. The crowd was still murmuring as I turned away, heading toward the exit. I didn't need to watch the aftermath. I knew it would unfold spectacularly. The seeds of their undoing were planted. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. I paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders. I had taken the first real step toward justice, toward reclaiming my dignity, and toward reminding my son that honesty is worth more than gold. But even as I walked to my car, I knew this wasn't the end. Michael would regroup. Vanessa would scheme. And the legal battles were only just beginning. The next moves would require patience, cunning, and relentless attention to detail. I was ready. Because after a lifetime of sacrifices, after decades of love and trust, I had learned one immutable truth. When someone underestimates you, when someone thinks they can manipulate and deceive you with impunity, the smallest, quietest person can wield the sharpest power. And I had all the tools I needed to ensure that justice would be served. The days after the disrupted wedding felt like a strange, suspended reality. Michael and Vanessa's lives had tilted, their carefully constructed world now teetering on the edge of chaos, and I watched from a distance, quietly savoring the ripple effects. The legal notices I had submitted, combined with the evidence presented at the wedding, forced both of them to confront the consequences of their manipulation. Vanessa, whose social media had once been a showcase of perfection, now posted carefully worded apologies, attempting to salvage her reputation. Michael, on the other hand, retreated from public life entirely, his arrogance replaced with an awkward, fumbling defensiveness. I kept to my routines, tending to my garden, cooking my meals, and organizing the house that had always been my sanctuary. But there was a new sense of satisfaction underlying every movement. I no longer felt the creeping anxiety that had gripped me when Michael and Vanessa were dictating my life. I was free, from the demands, from the manipulation, from the feeling that I owed someone something simply because I had loved them. One afternoon, I received a call from the wedding planner who had overseen the ceremony. The woman's voice was professional, but carried a hint of admiration. "Ms. Thompson, I just wanted to let you know that the contracts have been voided, and Michael and Vanessa are liable for all unpaid debts. They're facing serious financial consequences. I have to say, your composure during the wedding was remarkable." I smiled, though my eyes betrayed the fatigue I had carried for weeks. "Thank you. I only did what I had to do. It's about honesty and fairness, nothing more." She hesitated before adding, "It's not just about fairness. You reminded everyone in that room who has power, and how it can be wielded." Her words lingered as I hung up. She was right. I had reminded them, and perhaps the world, that deception has limits. Greed and manipulation can only go so far before truth asserts itself. The fallout wasn't immediate, but it was comprehensive. Vanessa's attempts to maintain her social image crumbled as former friends and colleagues began questioning her integrity. Social media posts praising her as the perfect bride were met with skeptical comments and even harsh criticism. She had built her persona on superficial charm, and now that veneer was cracking. Michael's pride took a more private hit. He had been forced to return funds to me, and the court ordered him to compensate vendors and the wedding planner who had been left in limbo. The man who once thought he could manipulate his own mother into paying for his dreams was now scrambling to repair the financial and reputational damage he had wrought. I didn't relish their suffering in a cruel way, but I did relish the justice of it. Watching them grapple with consequences, knowing that they could no longer hide behind charm, deception, or entitlement, brought a deep satisfaction. During this time, Claire became an unexpected ally. She had been hesitant at first, fearful of escalating conflict, but seeing the impact of my actions changed her perspective. She helped organize files, researched legal options, and offered emotional support that was steady and unflinching. Together, we were not just surviving the aftermath, we were reclaiming control. One morning, I received an envelope with the return address blocked out. Curious, I opened it carefully, expecting another demand or some last-ditch attempt at manipulation. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a formal settlement agreement, signed and notarized, detailing how Michael and Vanessa would repay every cent owed, including the $290,000 invoice, plus legal fees. I exhaled deeply, folding the document and placing it on the kitchen counter. This was final. The last vestiges of their control over my life had been erased. As I looked around my home, I realized how much weight had lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without the tight knot of worry in my chest. I was free, not just financially, but emotionally. I had reclaimed dignity, autonomy, and a sense of power that had been denied to me for far too long. Reflecting on the ordeal, I recognized the deeper lessons embedded in this painful journey. Love does not justify manipulation. Sacrifice does not entitle others to abuse it. And the facade of control, whether constructed by a spouse, child, or in-law, can be dismantled with patience, evidence, and courage. I sat in my garden that evening, the golden sun slipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The flowers I had tended for decades seemed brighter, more alive than ever. There was a quiet peace in the air, a confirmation that life could continue even after betrayal and heartbreak. The moral clarity settled in my mind like the final brushstroke on a canvas. Power isn't taken, it's reclaimed. Justice isn't a fleeting notion, it's the consequence of persistence, integrity, and steadfast action. And love, real love, is about giving without expectation, not about being used as a tool to feed someone else's greed. My grandchildren came to visit that evening, including the little boy who had whispered to me about stopping the wedding. His eyes were bright with trust and curiosity. He clung to my hand as we walked along the garden path. "Grandma," he said, looking up at me with wonder, "how did you know what to do?" I smiled, holding his small hand tightly. Sometimes, you just have to pay attention, gather the truth, and stand up for what's right. Even when it's hard. Even when it seems impossible. He nodded solemnly, as if he understood more than his years would allow. I realized then that the legacy of this experience wouldn't just be in the resolution of my conflict with Michael and Vanessa. It would be in the lessons I could pass down, the lessons about courage, integrity, and the power of standing your ground. Weeks later, life settled into a rhythm of calm restoration. Vendors were paid, debts were cleared, and the house returned to its familiar tranquility. Michael and Vanessa faded from my daily life, no longer looming figures of manipulation and entitlement. They were still my family biologically, but they no longer held dominion over my peace or my finances. Claire and I often talked about the ordeal over tea in the sunroom. "You were incredible, Mom," she said one afternoon, her voice filled with admiration. "I don't think I could have done it the way you did." I shook my head, smiling gently. I wasn't incredible. I was prepared. I had the truth, and I didn't let fear or love cloud my judgment. That's what anyone can do if they commit to it. The grandchildren joined us occasionally, and we shared stories, laughter, and small victories of ordinary life. I noticed a change not only in them but in myself. I felt lighter, stronger, and more capable than I had in decades. The betrayal and pain that once threatened to consume me had been transformed into lessons and empowerment. One quiet evening, as the house settled into its nighttime rhythm, I reflected on everything that had transpired. The greed, the lies, the betrayal, it had all been a test of resilience. And I had passed. More than that, I had emerged not just intact but triumphant, proving to myself and to anyone who doubted that age, love, and experience are forces that can overcome even the most audacious deception. I sipped my tea and looked out the window at the garden, the moon casting a serene glow over the flowers. My heart swelled with gratitude, for my own strength, for Claire's support, and for the grandchildren who reminded me that life's continuity outweighs temporary pain. Finally, I felt ready to share this story, not just as a warning about deceit and manipulation, but as an affirmation: justice and integrity matter, and standing up for yourself is never too late. And as I closed my eyes that night, I realized something profoundly simple but true: even after the deepest betrayal, life offers redemption, lessons, and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming what is rightfully yours. The moral lingered like a gentle echo: trust must be earned, greed can be undone, and courage is timeless. And perhaps most importantly, love without expectation is the only love worth holding on to.